Hello, my name is Trenton Allen, and I am here to talk to you about bees. Okay, so let's start with the necessity of bees. Bees pollinate 71% out of the 100 crops that account for 90% of the world's food supply. So that's not all, but very close. Like, that is a lot of different crops that are pollinated by bees. And without the bees, pollinating them would be extremely difficult. So it would be pretty highly likely that those crops would just completely die off. And our food supply would be pretty messed up. And in addition to that, bees in the US alone account for a $20 billion industry. That's a lot of jobs. That's a lot of money that our economy would take a hit if we lost our bees. So then you're wondering, what is wrong with the bees? Well, here, let me share with you. Colony collapse disorder. So this is when all of the male worker bees completely die off, and all that is left is the queen and the nursing bees and a bunch of babies. Okay? And bees experience this. We experience the loss of 30% of our colonies in the US each year. That is a huge amount of bees that are just gone, dead, absolutely eradicated. So, what is causing this? Well, some of the problems plaguing the bees, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I'm circling the aluminum mine right now. This little mine over here. So industrial waste is adding to the problem by putting aluminum and other metals into the air and the water. And that gets to the plants, and then the bees get it. Another problem at the moment is insecticides and herbicides and fungicides. So herbicides and fungicides on their own do not target bees, and they are not a problem. However, when they are combined with these insecticides, they can cause death in bees and paralysis and many other horrible things. In addition, when the herbicides and the fungicides are combined with other carcinicides that are dealt with to treat these varroa mites, that is another problem that is dealing with the bees, that is harming bee lives. And as well, these carcinicides are also harming the bees when they're supposed to be protecting them, because some beekeepers are getting a little overzealous with their treatments. And lastly, the variety of crops and what kinds of crops can also affect how these insecticides hurt bees, or if the bees even make it through the winter. Okay, so let's take a look at industrial waste. Mining runoff, specifically from bauxite mines, which produce aluminum, in Brazil is just poured into the water sources. So it is just poured on the ground. It is just put into nature, no cares given, and that can get absorbed by the plants. And then the aluminum in the water doesn't get processed by the plant. It just goes into its nectar and pollen, and then the bee picks it up and brings it home. Similarly, when the industrial waste is produced, that acidification, when it rains and precipitates, all of the metals that are in this exhaust also get transferred in the water to the plants, to the bees, and this all increases mortality of bees. So it's nothing crazy right now, but it is definitely a threat that is lowering bee lives. In addition, we have the neonicotinoid insecticides. These insecticides are meant to kill insects, of course, which a bee is. And so that's a problem for the bees, because they bring that back when they pollinate your farm crops, or if you use this on your crops in gardens and whatnot, that also harms the bees when they're trying to pollinate those flowers, because they bring it back on them and in the nectar, and they bring it to the hive. And this causes, when in the hive, it can cause paralysis, death, and even lower the reproduction of the queen. So not only are bees being unable to move and continue working, they're dying, and they're also not able, the queen is not able to reproduce workers to make up for these deaths and paralysis as quickly as she used to. So then you're thinking, how do we solve this? Well, you want to make sure that you are not using too much insecticide. You want under 20 parts per billion. Research has shown that this amount, under 20 parts per billion, is enough that it will still affect the bees, of course, because they are insects, but it will not affect the bees enough to cause colony collapse disorder or kill the bee or like destroy the hive. So this is a good solution for farmers and gardeners, so that way they can get both their plants protected, but also so that they can not be killing off our bees, which are super necessary to our environment. And next we'll talk about fungicides and herbicides. So we've got a little diagram here. So we've got seeds, right? The seeds are then coated in the insecticides, the fungicides, and the herbicides, and that makes them sticky. So when they are sticky, it makes them much harder to plant because you want efficient planting. You want one seed in each hole. You don't want to waste your seeds. So they combine it with the talc powder. This talc powder with the seeds makes them no longer stick together, but is still coated in those pesticides that are needed to protect the crops. So then when they plant those seeds, the talc powder is just released into the environment. And it can spread, it can go a fair distance and spread those pesticides onto nearby crops and other plants that are being pollinated by bees in the area. So when that happens, they bring back these fungicides, herbicides, and neonicotinoid insecticides to the hive, and that causes twice the damage. Now, this is because the herbicides and the fungicides on their own do not intentionally or non-intentionally affect bees at all. However, when combined with the neonicotinoid insecticides, they have been found to double the damage done by those previously mentioned insecticides. So that is already a big blow if the insecticides get in there, let alone when combined, which they normally are when being planted. So that is just wicked damage. So I propose this solution to farmers. Any industrial engineers or people who make the farming equipment, please come up with a way that you can capture the talc when it's being planted, so that way it's not just released into the atmosphere. Just something really simple to capture the gas. Oh, actually went back. And then we've got Verona mites and beekeeper nightmares. So Verona mites, if left untreated, these little buggers right here, can kill a colony in 2 to 4 years on their own. Okay? So beekeepers have been using these injections of carcinicides to deal with the Varroa mite plight. However, sadly, some beekeepers are getting a little overzealous with their treatments. If you combine carcinicides, because these drugs are dealt, because both Varroa mites and bees are arthropods, actually, when these drugs are used to treat the bees, they can actually cause more harm than the mites on their own would do. And in addition, if those herbicides and fungicides end up getting on into the hive, even without the neonicotinoid insecticides. If those bees are receiving treatments for varroa mites, it can also cause damage to them, excuse me, in that way. So both overuse of acaricides and use of acaricides in addition to the harmless on their own fungicides and herbicides can cause horrible damage to the beehives. Um, as well, I believe that uh, the dangers of these insecticides are actually being downplayed by farmers because they have been reporting lower pesticide levels than than scientists have found in these studies for the bees. So it's possible that they are just going unnoticed and that they don't realize the accumulating factors here when all of these different pesticides are combined together. Next, biodiversity. So bees require different types of pollen for the winter. And in order to get the pollen and nectar that they need for the winter, they need different kinds of crops nearby. So planting tons and tons of corn, just as far as the eye can see, can really harm beehives when pollinating that area because they won't collect enough food in order for them to actually make it through the winter, and they could starve to death. And then as well, alfalfa and cotton, different types of plants can affect how bees reproduce. So alfalfa and cotton showed less bees after pollination, as opposed to all the other plants which showed more bees after pollinating. So pollinating these plants actually killed the bees more than they increased in population by pollinating, which is really odd. And similarly over here, pumpkin, alfalfa, cantaloupe, and corn showed more dead bees than actually plants produced. So not only is this horrible for the farmers, this is horrible for the environment as well, because those bees, more bees died than they produced plants. And lastly, bees are an important part of the planet's ecosystem, and without them, life would be extremely difficult, if even possible. Thank you. And that was bees. That was the plight of bees.